All right, guys, we are back. We are finishing up the unique character of the structures, this section. Now we'll just be doing a concluding summary, and then we'll be getting into the next section, the next chapter. I've had a pretty long day at work, so I apologize if there's some extra uhs and ums, because I don't already do that already. I know, trust me, I know. But I say let's just get right into it, right? Thank you guys so much for continuing to watch. So it's a concluding summary. Man is the integrality of his mutations. He says, we have accordingly repeatedly emphasized that the structures we have outlined exist not only on paper, but are in fact part of the phenomena and actualities which constitute us. So it's important to remember that this isn't just a cool lens to analyze history through. You can do that, but it's also a better way of understanding yourself in direct engagement with the world, not necessarily just thinking in an abstract concept, but when things happen in the world, when you stop watching videos and you go out to the grocery store, things will happen. These structures are active within you. And I do have to say, I was reviewing this section just for this video, and there's some good stuff in here. So I'm very excited to get through. So he said, to be sure, these actualities and the way we have presented them have an inherent organizing scheme, as does any form of representation, which contains an element of distortion or violence. So what he's saying is, when we're ascribing these symbols to describe the structures, the unique character of the structures and their evolution, to a certain extent, we're imposing our own will and machinations onto the world. The world is kind of unnatural or unorganized, kind of chaotic, and we are assigning order to it. That's okay, but always remember that the world is naturally sort of unorganized. Just don't think that your projections are necessarily 100% correct. And yet, our organizing scheme, let's see, applies to living processes which of themselves correct the schematic rigidities where they would be too powerful. We have already considered this corrective force inherent in all life in the gradually expanding design of our synoptic table. So it's just describing our charts that we love here. The table is intended to be not a straitjacket or a rationalistic patchwork, but in its demonstrable overlappings, an attempt in mental fashion to show man viewed in terms of his principal components as an entirety. So it's not a jail where you get thrown into the charts and now we're all confined and imprisoned by these charts. The charts will change, and if there's new things, add it, right? That don't get too lost. It is with such elucidation and clarification that we are concerned, not with explanations or deliberations. Nor are we inclined. I'll skip that. But he says, but even assuming that our discussion were actually to provide us with a survey of ourselves, our reactions and actions, as we might hope for, what is gained thereby? This is a rational, that is a perspectivistic, goal-oriented question, and this is precisely why we are raising it. For even when viewed from the one-sided utilitarian viewpoint, such a survey of those things that give our life its main emphasis can have a clarifying effect. If we apply the knowledge and insight laid out in the synoptic table directly to ourselves and to others, we will gain a better understanding of many actions and reactions, since we will have come to see their roots and conditionalities. So that's what we're going to be getting at here. We can use the one-sided rationalist approach to elucidate and understand and to accrue knowledge in mental terms, to deduce what is, right? Use rationality to deduce what is. But now that when we get into should, and I actually just wrote a Substack about this article, let's be more integral. So when we're describing the problem or coming to understand the problem, we can be one-sided rationalists. But after the problem has been, knowledge of the problem has been ascertained, let's remove rationalism and do the integral balance stuff. There you go. Let's see. The significance of this becomes evident when we realize that in every human being, the one or the other structure predominates over the others. This is really interesting. So most people in the West will have rational, but you'll also have, of course, if you go to Timbuktu, you might have the magical structure or the mythical structure, the unperspectable world. But think about this. There are probably people you know in your personal life who are romantics, who struggle in a rational, causal, efficient, hardened, willful world of volition where they need to be disciplined. They might struggle with that. But what they don't struggle with is creativity and ideas and sensitivity. They have the mythical consciousness structure predominating in them. Whereas I, for example, at least did have the mental structure. This is why I could not make any headway when I would argue with people, and all I would do was end up pissing them off because I wasn't meeting them where they are. Now, in fairness, they weren't meeting me where I'm at, but now that I have knowledge of all the different structures, I say, no, I'm not going to. I'll meet you where you're at, and then I'll try to build you up to the integral consciousness structure. So when a romantic is giving you romantic nonsense, you have to meet them where they are. You have to affirm and engage in conversation about feelings, emotions, instincts, romanticism that is not going to be rational or quantifiably measurable. You're going to have to acknowledge that aspect of the human condition and say, that is great. That is amazing. We love that. I don't want to live in a world without emotions or art or any of that stuff. Having said that, it has a place. It has nowhere, it does not belong in science or math. When we start getting into the laws of attraction, adhesion, and bearing, we don't emotionalize these concepts. But when we get into the concepts of the soul, of feeling, of the individuation journey, of what it means to be, then yes, we can do this sort of mythical, romantic, immeasurable accounting of this aspect of the human condition. Very interesting. I want homework assignment. If you know someone who's a little offbeat, I want you to try to ascertain which consciousness structure is predominating in them. It's very fun. Mostly in the Western, I won't lie, mostly it's rational. But you will find these romantic artist guys who just struggle. Okay, this brings about extremely obstructive consequences for us since we respond to certain events inadequately without noticing the inadequacy of our reactions and their negative effect on us. For example, someone at home in a predominantly magical attitude will find it difficult to cope with the demands of life posed by the mythical, not to mention the mental structure. Instead of responding to a rational demand in a disciplined and directed way, I'm going to repeat that because it does highlight the efficient aspects of rationality. Instead of responding to a rational demand in a disciplined and directed way, and to a mythical demand in an encompassing and equalizing manner, such a person can only react to the dictates of drive and instinct, that is, in emotional, non-committal, and chaotic or predominantly magic responses. This means that he or she will founder in the face of important questions of life. Such foundering is mainly expressed in major, protracted, and chronic illness. Why is it that my cousin, and I'm not speaking of a real life cousin I have, just hypothetically, who is so rational, he's an atheist logic lord, but when you piss him off, he freaks the hell out and he becomes another person. The emotional self comes through, and all of a sudden, Mr. Rationality, he's gone. He'll be back whenever this guy calms down. Why is that? Because, well, he's going to explain the connections between magic and um, the mental structure, which you should know by now. It's focused towards the external, right? Magic was the discovery of nature, or mental was the discovery of the objectified spatial world. Very similar. It's external, not internal. But that's why you get this sort of extreme irrationality from rationalists, because they're only working with a limited aspect of the human condition. So when you eventually touch that other aspect that is irrational or magical or mythical, it's going to be overdrive. It's going to be overdosing on mythical deficient emotion. You don't want that. It's important to be rational, but you must keep it balanced. And even if you want to use rationality to master the psyche, I'm cool with that. But that isn't what happens. In addition, life has a tendency to find, oh, that's another thing when he says, into a mythical demand in an encompassing and equalizing manner. This has helped me a lot. Anytime I get into good and evil, good and bad, irrationality and irrationality, stuff like that, 2D flat circle, baby. Psychic unity. It's so much better than this nonsense rationalist hyper dividing and trying to quantifiably measure that which is quantifiably immeasurable. It's never going to work. In addition, life has a tendency to find its equilibrium. Since we live in a consciousness structure pervaded, as ours is, by conceptions of perspectivity, we must bring this structure into balance with the others if we are to act against life itself. Since we must bring this structure into balance with the others if we are to act against life itself. That is the key here. Rationalists unbalance rationality. They have taken it too far, and now we don't remove it entirely. We bring it back. Everything is balanced, everything is respected, and they deserve to be respected. The magical, the mythical, the mental, and now the integral. That is what it is. Not this taking one thing too far, which we've understood for 2,000 years, Aristotle, when you eat food, right, food is a good thing. No one would deny that, right? We simply would not be here without it. It fuels us. What happens if you eat too much food at one time? You'll starve. You'll die. Oh, starve. You'll die. You'll overconsume. You'll die. You won't just get sick. If you eat truly too much food in one sitting, you will die. What's the lesson here? Aristotle figured this out 2,000 years ago. You start with the good and you take it too far, it becomes, for lack of a better term, a bad. So all that is quantifiably, in a quantifiably measurable sense, can be considered good. It must be qualitatively balanced by qualitative valuation. So no, rationality, or I will admit to you, rationality is a good thing, but when you take it too far, you get rationalism and then you get all the problems. The fact that we achieve such an equilibrium by living an integral and not merely a fragmented life is the basic condition that makes possible the mutation which could possibly surmount the dualistic dead end into which we have maneuvered ourselves. Let us note the decisive fact that man is the integrality of his mutations. That's in italics. Only to the extent that he succeeds in living the whole is his life truly integral. But we should go one step further. Only if life is integral in the sense of equally living to the full, the structures which constitute us, does it encompass the emerging structure, not only potentially, but in an actual and acute sense. You can be as rational as you need to be, and you can also engage in spirituality, mythology, any sort of soul work, psychological individuation, or that kind of stuff, symbolic interpretation and deriving meaning from symbols. Hell, even occult stuff if you think it's okay. You can do both of these things. These separate concepts hit different aspects of the human condition. And unless you want to make the argument that I only want to sector off one aspect of the human condition at the direct expense of others, which will in turn cause it to start doing push-ups in the back, and then the door is going to crack, and then it's going to beat your ass. We don't want that. You must live as a full human. I can be scientific and rational while also taking seriously Rudolf Steiner's outline of an esoteric science, or Jean Gebser's narrative of the unfolding of consciousness structures, or just spirit, or the spiritual, or God, or anything, or myth, or Zeus, or whatever. You can do both of these things because both of these things, or all of these things, are hitting different aspects of the human condition, and they should be respected because of such. They can be used efficiently, and aspects of the world and the human condition have been created based on their efficient uses, and they deserve to be respected, not bullied away by rationality. Piss me off. All right. By this time, it should be evident that we are not merely toying here with thoughts, but are turning our mind to the prime difficulties that face the realization of an integral life. For life, after all, is not just a sum of vital aspects. The vitalists fail to realize the fundamentally one-sided and magic nature of their vitalist preoccupation. We must again approach here, by way of summary, a phenomenon that is truly terrifying so long as we remain unenlightened about it. We refer to the incursion of deficient magic phenomena into our world. Of course, again, this is right after World War II when he released this. The regression noticeable everywhere of our rational attitude to one of deficient magic. It is not as if the mythical attitude alone is overactivated today. Although the imagistic aspect of the cinema or the inflation of psychic imagery made conscious are clear testimony of a process of unbridled and uncontrolled regression to the deficient mythical structure, why is cinema or movies a form of a product of the mythical consciousness structure or mythical art? It's imagistic. It's of the imagination. And of course, we put that imagination to images in a physical sense. So there you go. That's why it's mythical. I can almost guarantee you Jean Gebser would deride modern movies as deficient mythical. I think this is a little snobbish. I mean, for me personally, I've got a movie collection up home. Or upstairs, I've got like over 300 movies that I spent my money on for the most part. I got some for Christmas. So I think it's a little snobbish. Like, okay, we got it. Go picture Zeus killing Athena or whatever it is. We got it. But movies are not necessarily rational, and they don't necessarily have to be enjoyed in an intellectual, analytical, calculated, rational sense. They're products of the mythical conscious structure, so they should be sort of dealt with this sort of irrational, symbolic, closed circle. Not every movie has to be rationally picked apart. And just because you point out some rational flaws in a piece of art, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to like it, because you're not really engaging with the art on that way. When I'm watching Whiplash or whatever, or Paris, Texas, I'm not doing some weird like logical calculation as I'm watching the film. I'm experiencing it as a whole, in which all of its separate parts are integrated into one perpetual dynamic picture that's always in flux. And it's sort of hitting me, not necessarily just it's hitting a part of my rationality, but it's also hitting other aspects of me. So don't get too lost on that. Some of these guys, sometimes I wonder of why they even enjoy art or why they even talk about art in the first place. They might as well just repeat the law of the excluded middle on repeat. They'd get the same thing out of it. Far stronger than this is the regression to the deficient magic structure. The relation of both the magical and the mental structures towards something outside of themselves, that of the magic to nature and of the mental to the world, spatialized, objectified world, that is, results in a stronger affinity between them than between either. What the fuck? Results in a stronger affinity between them than between either and the mythical. Okay, so there's a stronger affinity between magical and mental because both are externally oriented. That was a poorly phrased thing. He says collectivization and mass phenomena, for that matter, this is really great stuff we're about to get to. Collectivization and mass phenomena, for that matter, may well be nothing other than a reactivated magic clan attunement in deficient form. Political parties are a compelling example, particularly the extreme ones dominated by the fanatically blind point relatedness of the magical, and isolation or individuation may well be nothing more than the reactivated magic point-like unity become deficient. While the beginnings of individuation in the clan formed a unity in the magic structure, today they are today rationally torn asunder and driven to the extremes, have in their deficiency, unity in their magic structure, they are today rationally torn asunder and, driven to extremes, have in their deficiency a destructive effect. So right now, what we're really struggling against is deficient magic, which is not good, and deficient mental or rationalism, not good. You don't want that. You want efficient all. And we see that because, I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but I'll mention it. I mean, the obvious, and he's going to expand on it, but the political parties of extreme unity, well, what are these? Communism and fascism. Those are not good political ideologies, at least in my opinion, and probably Gebser's as well. Don't get me started on communism, by the way. I could rant, and I'm not a fan of fascism either. But so that's a big problem. And then we have this sort of hyper individuation and amassment, amalgamation, where everything is torn asunder, ripped apart, rationally divided and separated from one another. So now there's no unity that can be conferred, and everyone just is in their own little world in a dualistic sense. So now everyone is different from someone else. So everyone has something to prove, something to be mad about, something to be angry about, something to someone to want to impose their will on them. Not good. And of course, we should mention why these go hand in hand. So it's probably makes more sense that deficient magic follows from deficient mental, because if deficient mental divides the individual from the collective and goes too far to the point where the individual can confer no meaning, no social standing, um, no purpose, no joy, no none of that. You are removing or detaching him from powerful aspects of the human condition. And doing that, well, what do we get? What's the opposite of hyper individualism? Hyper unity. So, of course, in the age of hyper individualism, you will find hyper collectivism in communism and fascism. These are two poles that are not dualistic, they complement each other. Rationality, irrationality, all that stuff. When you go too far on one, the other will rise. So we went from deficient rational to deficient magic. What happens if so let's play this out. Okay, so we went from deficient mental to individualized. Okay, we need unity, we need to return to the collectivized aspects of the human condition. Great. Well, when we realize that we've tossed out rationality and now individuals no longer have rights, people are used as just little more than vessels for the state, we are confronted with the evils of communism and fascism, then we run back to hyper individualism, and that is our own little jail and our own little torture chamber, and then we run back. So we got to break this dualism. Or stated differently, we might say that the hyper-objectivation achieved by the ratio brings about isolation, whereas the hyper-subjectivation, the overemphasis of the ego, leads to the limits of ego capacity or the ego, reverting to its psychic conditionality rather than mastering the psyche. Is itself ruled and condemned by it. It is absorbed by the unconscious, by a moderation, by the master. Pretty much what I just explained. All remedies proposed to combat this danger turn out to be unsuitable. Political parties of unity or unified states attempt to regulate the problems of isolation or collectivization, although they reveal their own deficient character by their one-sided demands for power. The attempt is made to improve the circumstances of deficient magic by means of deficient magic, an attempt, as it were, to drive out the devil by invoking Beelzebub. Thought that was cool. So when you're trying to solve problems of, let's say, communism or fascism, manifestations of deficient magic, you're never going to solve that by trying to get even more unity. That's what they are. That's what got them in the trouble in the first place. You're never going to solve that by saying, "Oh, well, you thought the communists and fascists were unified." Well, wait till you see the Justinian political party. Everyone's going to be named Justin. Yeah, you can't do it. Now, this is some good stuff, and you can make some connections. I'll let you do that to modern political stuff here. Let this one example suffice to show the basic point. Wherever we encounter a predominance of insistent request, and fanaticism is a request blindly elevated to a demand which not only petitions but compels. So, insistent request and fanaticism. Wherever we find a prevalence of the idea of unification in whatever form, a doctrine of unity, the establishment of an association, a huge organization, a one-party state, and the like, wherever we encounter a stress on the concept of obedience, as in an overemphasis on the military or a belonging and belongings, as in the property claims of capitalistic trust or family patriarchies, and in general, wherever we meet up with overweening emotionalism, as in mass assemblies, propaganda slogans, and the like, we may conclude that we are dealing mainly with essentially deficient manifestations of magic. I'm going to read the last sentence again. And in general, wherever we meet up with overwhelming emotionalism, as in mass assemblies, propaganda, slogans, and the like, we may conclude that we are dealing mainly with essentially deficient manifestations of magic. Now, I'm going to play the enlightened centrist role for a second and say that this was a pretty damn good description of the far left and the far right. Both of these groups hit all of these, especially the last part about mass assemblies, propaganda slogans, all that nonsense, this sort of reductive sloganeering. You must go with the party or you will be canceled. This originally started with the left, but it is, I promise you, it is growing on the right. That's deficient magic. So when you see the far left and the far right, I mean, I'm not trying to tell you what to think. You have your own experiences, you have your own ideas, beliefs. Knock yourself out. But I would just warn you that there is a threat there, that when you see this sort of everything I just described in modern day, that's not good. You don't want that. It might entice you to think it's good because it's unity and all that. Great, but no. And the fact that you know it's deficient magical should steer you away. You'd be like, okay, I know what that is. I'm not doing it. Now we continue. Their deficiency can be recognized by their very claim to exclusivity, as if they alone had validity or worth in contrast to the validity of other structures and forms of manifestation. Yet one may well ask what is to be gained by our classification of these phenomena as being deficiently magical. The answer is that because we know how they come to be and recognize their conditionality, we no longer have to face them unaided. Even though we may be unable to do anything against such phenomena, we can at least avoid becoming submissive to them. We can view them with a certain detachment, secure in the knowledge that the deficient acquisition of unity does not lead to strength, but rather of necessity and naturally to brutal power and ultimately to impotence. I mean, beautifully said, right? I mean, what a great way to put it. It's just each structure has their own validity, has their own worth, and when the magic tries to go on its own thing, there's going to be problems, just like with mental and mythical. It's just great stuff. And that's the key here. Knowledge, once you have knowledge of what's happening, once I say, rather than directly giving into the emotion of anger, if I can sort of step back here and use an efficient rationality, an efficient ego, and say, I am being angry, let me analyze this for as long as it takes, as long as necessary. I was going to say quickly. And then once I've cooled down and had a grasp of the understanding. Let's get out of self-consciousness and get back into direct engagement. Same thing here. After what has been said, examples of an overly mythical conception come easily to mind. Wherever, yeah, probably in the form of Marvel movies, according to Gebser. Wherever we encounter an immoderate emphasis on the imagistic, the ambivalent, the psychic, on unbridled fantasy, Phantasy. I wonder if that's the origin of the difference between fat and Phat fat. On unbridled fantasy, imagination, or power of fancy, we may conclude the presence of a deficient mythical attitude that threatens the whole or integrality. So what you see in deficient mythical, which you obviously don't want to do, is this sort of person who's just overly romantic, overly optimistic, overly romantic, valorizes feelings and sentiments way too much, doesn't seem to acknowledge the real danger with emotion of completely forfeiting yourself to your instincts and whims, doesn't seem to acknowledge that, refuses to acknowledge science or any sort of rational thought because it doesn't stir up the right emotions in him, and he thinks it's cold and shallow. Okay, well, that's nice. Well, you know what? I kind of want life-saving technology. I want vaccines. I want all this great stuff. I want rational economic policies. I want wealth. I want all this stuff. And we can also have all the great stuff that the romantics like, as long as we just stop putting them in the either or and choosing one or the other. But that's essentially a deficient mythical, this sort of overly romantic, someone who doesn't argue against rationalism, but argues against rationality. And then that's always going to be a problem. You don't want to do that. There's no point of it. What's the point of deluding yourself and romanticizing the world to the point where you build up your expectations and the corresponding pain that you will then feel is it directly related to how much you deluded yourself? So no, don't be overly romantic. And two, wherever we are caught up in the labyrinth network of mere concepts or meet up with a one-sided emphasis on willful or voluntaristic manifestations or attempts at spasmodic synthesis, trinitary, tripartite, dialectical, isolation, or mass phenomena, we may assuredly conclude the presence of a deficient mental, that is, extreme rationalistic source. So then you kind of go the other way, someone who's too disciplined, too rational, doesn't take into account emotions, spirituality, myth, symbol, has no respect for romanticism or the soul, has no respect for literature or the internal, the psyche. Just this sort of really cold, I'm going to rationally deconstruct everything. Everything is about will and volition. And if it's not true by means of rational thought, then it's not true at all. This manner of observing the manifestations which we encounter must not, however, be applied mechanically or indiscriminately. Only their immoderation or excess are deficient. Where they emerge in moderation, these phenomena are today still efficient and effective. Use efficient mental consciousness structure, efficient mythical consciousness structure, efficient magical consciousness structure. If you're at a rock concert and there's a unity there and there's no real risk of any sort of danger, you're not going to, you don't want to get robbed or anything. Let yourself into it. Get into it. Do what the crowd is doing. Stop being too cool for school, or stop being scared to give into a little bit of healthy emotion, for God's sake. I mean, be a human being, for Christ's sake. There's times where you are experiencing aspects of life that if you were to stop and think about it, it would be to remove all its potency. And we're actually going to get into that in a couple sections in the numinous experience. Let art overwhelm you. Let art overwhelm the intellect and have that feeling that fuels you and gives you something to live for. I mean, it's like Robin Williams in the Dead Poets Society said, the rational subjects are what help us to live and what make living life easier. But poetry, literature, stuff like that, philosophy, spirituality, this is why we live. Okay, these are two balanced poles, not two antithetical opposites. We must not lose sight of this fact, for if we do, we place ourselves into question. It is not the measure alone which is decisive. It is the moderation contained in measure along with the immoderation, the measured as well as the immeasurable, as expressed in the root of the words measure and mass. The summary then may have served to illustrate that 1. All structures constitute us. 2. All structures must be lived commensurate with their constituent. It's been a long day. I apologize. 2. All structures must be lived commensurate with their constitutive values. constitutive values, excuse me, if we are to live a whole or integral life. No structure may therefore be negated. Negation enters when one structure or the other is overemphasized, whereby this accentuation is transferred to its deficient manifestations, which are always quantitative. 4. Certain designations, ascriptions, and characteristic concepts attributed to the individual. My goodness, I apologize. We're running out of steam here. Certain designations, ascriptions, and characteristic concepts attributed to the individual structures render their effectuality evident. Beautiful summary, beautifully said, and now we'll get a sneak peek into what we're doing next. We must therefore establish some additional means for distinguishing with certainty the seeming from the actual new. For this, we append 3 additional considerations to supplement our discussion so far. The first addresses the question of space and time, the second the question of soul/psyche and spirit, and the third the forms of realization and thought. Without having clearly demonstrated the conditionality of space and time, without having established what is psychic and what is presumably spiritual, and without having gained insight into the forms or types of realization and thought processes within each individual structure, we will be unable to make evident the new. So that's a little sneak peek. I apologize for kind of going off the rails there at the end. I'm just tired. Thank you guys so much for sticking with it. The next sections, okay, we're going to be getting to the bottom of things. Profound stuff is coming. We're going to be getting to the bottom of time. A lot of people struggle with that. Time, which is awesome. Soul and spirit. We're going to be learning what soul and spirit is, which has, I would argue, fundamentally changed my life. I mean, this book has already changed my life. But this section on time, every section so far in this upcoming chapter is a life changer, is a game changer. I'm telling you. Soul and spirit is excellent. And then I'm about a quarter way through forms of thought and realization. And that I haven't even, we're just scratching the surface. And that is brilliant stuff. I mean, there is some really, really amazing stuff on the way here. So I'm super excited to continue this with you guys. I might try to get another video later this week. This will probably be a third video in my series of Kill Rationalism. Most likely the connections between perspectival sight or perspective and mental consciousness. That'll be a little bit of a spoiler for the book ahead. So if you want to get a little sneak peek of some of the discoveries we're going to be making later on, stay tuned for that. You guys are the best. I love you guys. If you guys ever want to just come on and talk, it doesn't necessarily have to be about Gebser, but if you guys want to talk Gebser, if you're just like a fan or a subscriber, you know, we can talk. If maybe you have certain questions you wanted to ask me, or we can make connection between Gebser and modern 2025 life or anything like that. We can do all sorts of that stuff. So please just reach out, maybe leave a comment, and I'll talk to you guys, and I'll see you guys soon. You guys are the best. All right, keep thriving. Okay.